My uncle took over my late father's business the day he died and told the family I had agreed to it. I had signed nothing. My name is Lena Marsh, and I was 34 the day my father died, and my uncle called a family meeting. Not to grieve, to announce. My father died on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday evening, my Uncle Philip had gathered 12 members of my extended family in my grandmother's living room and told them that my father's business, the property management company my father had built over 27 years, was transferring to him effective immediately. He said it was what my father had wanted. He said it had all been agreed upon. He said the transition was already underway. He said I had been informed and had given my blessing. I want to be precise about that last part. He told 12 people that I had agreed, that I had given my blessing, on the day my father died. While I was sitting in a hospital corridor 2 miles away, filling out discharge paperwork for a man who had just become a death certificate. I had not agreed to anything. I had not been asked. I had not spoken to Philip since the morning. I had signed nothing. Nothing. Not a transfer document. Not a consent form, not a letter of intent, not a napkin, nothing. I found out what Philip had told the family at 9:47 that Wednesday evening when my cousin Marcus texted me. He said, "Did you really sign the business over to Philip?" I sat in the hospital parking lot. I read the text. Then I called my father's business attorney. She answered on the second ring. I said, "Ruth, my uncle just told 12 people I agreed to transfer my father's business to him." She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "Do not sign anything." I said, "I have not signed anything." She said, "Good." She said, "I need you to come in tomorrow morning." She said, "I have something your father asked me to prepare." I said, "I will be there at 8. She said, "Lena." I said, "Yes." She said, "I am sorry about your father." I said, "Thank you, Ruth." I said, "Tell me tomorrow." She said, "Yes." She said, "Tomorrow." I drove home. I sat at my kitchen table. I thought about 27 years of a business my father had built from a single property management contract into a company that managed 46 commercial and residential properties across 3 counties. I thought about the Wednesday mornings I had spent in his office since I was 7 years old, doing homework at the corner desk while he took tenant calls. I thought about the summer I was 16 when he taught me to read a lease. I thought about law school and the specific reason I had chosen business and property law. I thought about the operating agreement, the one my father had asked me to review 18 months ago, the one I had reviewed and returned and filed a copy of in my own records because I was a business attorney, and filing copies was what I did. The one that said very specific things about succession, things Philip had apparently not read, or had read and chosen to ignore. Either way, I was going to find out tomorrow. Welcome back to 2 a.m. Revenge, where the quiet ones who kept every receipt finally get the room they deserved. If you have ever had someone claim your agreement to something you never agreed to, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and subscribe so the next one finds you. My father's name was Thomas Marsh, and he built things the way certain men build things, with the specific combination of patience and stubbornness that does not distinguish between the two, because to him they were the same quality expressed in different directions. He started Marsh Property Management with one contract, a small commercial building on a street nobody was paying attention to yet. He managed it himself. He answered the maintenance calls at 2 in the morning. He drove out in February to deal with burst pipes, and in July to deal with HVAC failures, and in October to deal with the specific rotating crisis of a commercial building whose tenants were small businesses with small margins and large problems. He did it alone for 6 years. Then he hired 1 person, then 3, then 7. By the time I was in law school, the company had 14 employees and managed 28 properties and had a reputation in 3 counties that had been built on 22 years of answering the phone when other companies did not. He was proud of it, not loudly. in the specific quiet way of a man who understood that what he had built was real because it had been tested and had held. I want to tell you about my Uncle Philip, because the story requires it, and because fairness requires it, even when the subject resists fairness. Philip is my father's younger brother by 4 years. He is 61 years old. He spent his career in sales, not property, not management, sales of various things in various industries, with the specific restless energy of a man who was good at the beginning of things and less interested in the middle. He had worked briefly for my father in year 8. 6 months, it had not gone well. The specifics were not something my father ever detailed to me. He said only that Philip was better suited to a different kind of work, and that the parting had been mutual, and that family was family regardless. Philip had been at every family gathering since. Warm, loud, the specific presence of a man who took up space comfortably, and who had a story for every occasion. He had also, in the last 2 years of my father's illness, been increasingly interested in the business, not in operating it, in discussing it. He asked about it at holidays. He asked about the revenue and the client list and the property values and the staff. He framed the questions as family interest, as pride in his brother's achievement. I filed the questions away with the professional alertness of a woman who had spent 9 years in business law and who understood the difference between pride and assessment. I said nothing. My father said nothing. We both noticed. Neither of us addressed it. That was the space Philip used. My father was diagnosed 18 months before he died. A degenerative condition that moved with the specific pace of something determined to take everything important before it took him. His cognition stayed sharp longer than his body. That mattered. He used the time his cognition gave him the way he used everything, specifically, deliberately, without waste. He called me 6 weeks after the diagnosis. He said, "I need to do some things while I can do them correctly." I said, "I know." He said, "I want to start with the business." He said, "I want the operating agreement updated." He said, "I want it to reflect exactly what I want to happen, and I want it to be airtight." I said, "Who is doing the drafting?" He said, "Ruth." He said he had already called her. He said he wanted me to review it when it was done. I said, "Of course." He said, "There is one thing I want you to understand before you read it." I said, "Okay." He said, "Philip is going to want the business." He said, "Philip has been building toward asking for it for 2 years. He said, I have not given him any reason to believe he will get it. He said, I want to make sure the document makes it impossible to misread." I said, "Okay." He said, "The business goes to you." He said, "You have been preparing for it since you were 7 years old, doing homework at that corner desk." He said, "You are the only person I trust to run what I built." He said, "Philip will be disappointed." He said, "Disappointment is not the same as entitlement." I said, "I understand." He said, "Read the document carefully when Ruth sends it." He said, "Flag anything you would change." He said, "I want it perfect." I said, "I will make it perfect." He said, "I know you will." He said, "That is why it is yours." The operating agreement arrived 3 weeks later. Ruth had drafted it with the specific precision of someone who had been told to make it impossible to misread and had taken the instructions seriously. The succession clause was explicit. Upon the death or permanent incapacity of Thomas Marsh, the sole member and owner of Marsh Property Management, LLC, the membership interest and all associated assets shall transfer in full to Lena Marsh. No other transfers authorized, no other parties named, no ambiguity. I read it 4 times. I flagged 2 minor points of language. Ruth incorporated them. My father signed the amended agreement in Ruth's office on a Tuesday afternoon. She had it witnessed and notarized and filed with the state business registry that same week. It was done. My father called me that evening. He said, "It is handled." I said, "I know." He said, "I want you to keep a copy." I said, "I already have one." He said, "Of course you do." He almost laughed. He said, "Lena." I said, "Yes." He said, "Take care of what I built." I said, "You know I will." He said, "I know." He said, "That is the whole of it." He said, "Good night." I said, "Good night." He died 14 months later on a Wednesday morning. And by Wednesday evening, Philip had told 12 people it was his. I want to tell you about the 14 months between the operating agreement and my father's death, because they were not defined by what Philip did. They were defined by what my father and I did. We worked together in a way we had never quite worked before, not because he was dying, because the diagnosis had removed the assumption of future time and replaced it with the specific clarity of present time. He introduced me to every major client personally. He walked me through every property individually. He explained every vendor relationship and every lease negotiation and every decision he had made in 27 years and why he had made it. He gave me the company the way you give someone something you have spent your life building, completely, with full context, without holding back the parts that were complicated. He said, "I want you to understand all of it, not just the profitable parts, all of it." I said, "I understand all of it." He said, "I know." He said, "I am telling you anyway." We spent those 14 months transferring not just ownership but knowledge, the specific institutional knowledge that lives inside a business and that cannot be captured in any document because it is the accumulated judgment of 27 years of decisions made under pressure. He gave me all of it. That was the real inheritance. The operating agreement was the legal form of it. The 14 months was the substance. Ruth's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown that I had been to many times over 9 years of professional life. I arrived at 8 in the morning. She was already at her desk. She had coffee waiting. She had a folder open in front of her. She looked at me with the careful expression of a professional who has been holding something important and is ready to stop holding it. She said, "Sit down, Lena." I sat. She said, "Your father came to see me 3 months ago." She said he came alone on a Thursday afternoon. She said he told her that Philip had been making inquiries. She said not specific requests, inquiries. Questions about the business structure, questions about what happened to the membership interest upon death, questions that Ruth recognized from a professional standpoint as the questions of a person who was planning something. She said your father recognized it too. She said he asked her to prepare an additional document, not to replace the operating agreement, to supplement it. She placed it on the table, a notarized letter of instruction. My father's handwriting in the opening paragraph before Ruth's formal language took over. The opening paragraph said, "It is my specific and unambiguous instruction that no representation of consent by my daughter Lena Marsh regarding the transfer or management of Marsh Property Management shall be considered valid unless it is in writing bearing her original signature witnessed by at least one independent party and filed with this office within 30 days of my death." I read it twice. He had anticipated the false consent claim. He had sat in Ruth's office 3 months before he died, and he had said specifically, "Philip is going to tell people Lena agreed." He had built a wall against it. He had known. I looked at Ruth. She said, "Your father was a very precise man." I said, "Yes." She said, "He came to me because he wanted this on the record." She said, "He said Philip was not going to ask permission." She said he said Philip was going to act and then claim permission after. She said he wanted a document that made the claim impossible to sustain. I looked at the letter, my father's handwriting in the first paragraph, his signature at the bottom, notarized, filed, 3 months before he died. He had known, he had handled it. I said, "Ruth." She said, "Yes." I said, "We need to call a family meeting." She said, "I agree." She said, "I will be there." I said, "Thank you." I said, "For this and for everything." She said, "Your father was my client for 22 years. She said, "This is the least of what I owe him." I did not call Philip. I want to be clear about that decision because it was deliberate. Philip had told 12 people I had agreed to something I had not agreed to. He had made a public claim on the day of my father's death. He had acted on that claim by presenting himself to the business staff as the incoming owner. I know this because the office manager, a woman named Sandra, who had worked for my father for 11 years, called me Thursday morning. She said Philip had come to the office. She said he had introduced himself as the new owner. She said he had asked for access to the client files and the financial records. She said she had not provided them. She said she had told him she would need to speak with me first. She said she hoped that was the right call. I said, Sandra, that was exactly the right call. She said, I did not think it sounded right. She said, your dad never mentioned Philip in any business conversation in 11 years. I said, no. I said he would not have. She said, what do you need from me? I said, keep everything locked. I said, document his visit today with the time and what he asked for. I said, do not give access to anyone until you hear from me or from Ruth. She said, done. She said, Lena. I said, yes. She said, I am sorry about your father. She said he was the best person I have ever worked for. I said, I know. I said, thank you, Sandra. I said, I will see you next week. She said, yes. She said, we will be here. That was Sandra. 11 years of loyalty to my father, transferred without interruption to me the morning I needed it most. Some things hold because they were built correctly. If you have ever had someone act first and claim permission after, if you have ever been the victim of a false consent you never gave, stay with me and subscribe because the family meeting is 3 days away, and Philip does not know what Ruth is about to place on the table. The family meeting was Saturday, my grandmother's living room, the same room where Philip had made his announcement 3 days earlier. 14 people this time, the 12 from Wednesday plus 2 aunts who had heard and wanted to understand. Philip arrived first. He stood near the fireplace with the specific ease of a man who believes he is hosting. He nodded at me when I came in, the nod of a man who believes the difficult conversation is behind him. I nodded back. Ruth sat beside me. Philip looked at Ruth. He looked at me. He said he had not known I was bringing an attorney. I said she is the family's business attorney. I said she has been my father's attorney for 22 years. He said he had his own attorney. A man named Garrett sat beside him with a portfolio. The same Garrett who appeared in other scripts. The same reputation. I noted it. I said nothing. My grandmother sat in her chair at the center of the room. She was 84 years old, and she had been watching her 2 sons navigate their relationship for 60 years, and she had the specific expression of a woman who already knew how this was going to end and was waiting for everyone else to get there. I sat down. I placed my folder on my lap. Philip opened. He said he wanted to thank everyone for coming. He said this was a difficult time for the family. He said Thomas would have wanted the business to stay in the family, and that was what Philip intended to ensure. He said he and Lena had discussed the transition, and that Lena had agreed the business should go to someone with the experience to run it. He looked at me when he said it, with the specific confidence of a man who believes his version of events is the one that will survive the room. I let him finish. My grandmother looked at me. She knew. She had known since Wednesday. She had not said anything because she was waiting for the correct moment. She recognized the correct moment when it arrived. She said, Philip. He said, yes, Mom. She said, let Lena speak. He said, of course. He sat down. I stood up. I placed the operating agreement on the coffee table. I did not explain it first. I let them see it. Let the title page register. Marsh Property Management, LLC, Operating Agreement, amended and restated. 18 months ago. I said this is the operating agreement for my father's company. I said it was prepared by Ruth and signed by my father 18 months ago. I said the succession clause is on page 7. I said I will read it. I read it, every word. The room was quiet. Then I placed the letter of instruction on top of the operating agreement. I said my father came to Ruth 3 months ago. I said he prepared this additional document. I said I will read the first paragraph. I read it, every word. No representation of consent by my daughter, Lena Marsh, shall be considered valid unless it is in writing bearing her original signature. The room was very quiet. I looked at Philip. I said, on Wednesday evening you told 12 people I had agreed to transfer the business to you. He said we had discussed it. I said we had not discussed it. He said, at Christmas you said... I said nothing at Christmas about the business. He said you implied. I said I implied nothing. He said Lena. I said Philip. I said I need you to understand what you did. I said my father died on Wednesday morning. I said by Wednesday evening you had told his family that I had consented to give you his business. I said I had not consented. I said I had not been asked. I said I had signed nothing. I said my father anticipated this. I placed my hand flat on the letter of instruction. I said he sat in Ruth's office 3 months ago, and he told her specifically that you were going to claim consent you had not been given. I said he prepared a document to make that claim impossible. I said the document is notarized and filed. I said there is no version of Wednesday evening's announcement that can be sustained against these 2 documents. The room was very quiet. Philip's attorney opened his portfolio. He looked at the operating agreement. He looked at the letter of instruction. He looked at the filing stamps. He closed his portfolio. He said something quietly to Philip. Philip looked at the table. His attorney said to the room that he would need to review the documents before any further discussion. Ruth said the documents were available for review and that she would provide certified copies. She said review was welcome. She said it would not change the filing dates. Philip's attorney said he understood. He said he would be in touch. He looked at Philip. He nodded once. The nod of a man communicating that the position is not tenable. Philip looked at my grandmother. She looked back at him. She did not say anything. She did not need to. My grandmother had known her son for 61 years. The look said everything a mother's look can say when the thing she is looking at is both her child and her disappointment. Philip looked at the coffee table. He said, Thomas never told me. I said, no. He said, I assumed. I said, I know. He said, I thought you would not want to run it. I said, why did you think that? He said, you have your own career. I said, I am a business attorney. I said, I have been preparing to run my father's business since I was 7 years old. He said, I did not know that. I said, you did not ask. He was quiet. Then he said, I should have asked. I said, yes. I said, you should have. He said, I am sorry for what I told people. He said it the way people say things when they understand the size of what they did. Not small, not performed, just said. I said, I know. I said, I believe you. He said, is there anything I can do? I said, you can tell the people you told the truth. He said, that will be embarrassing. I said, yes. I said, it should be. He said, okay. He said, I will. He stood up. He looked at my grandmother. She looked at him. He left. His attorney followed. The room breathed. Philip told the people he had told. He called each of them. I know because Marcus called me on Sunday and said Philip had called him. He said Philip had told him he had been wrong. He said Philip had told him the business belonged to me and always had. He said Philip had asked Marcus to pass it along to whoever else he had spoken to. Marcus said he would. He said, Lena. I said, yes. He said, I knew on Wednesday it did not sound right. I said, I know. I said, thank you for texting me. He said, of course. He said, your father built something real. I said, yes. He said, take care of it. I said, that is exactly what I intend to do. I want to tell you about the Monday after the family meeting. I drove to the office my father had occupied for 27 years. The corner office with the window that looked at the street he had watched change around him as the neighborhood grew. Sandra was at her desk when I came in. She stood up. She said, good morning. I said, good morning, Sandra. She said, the staff is here. She said, all 9 of them. She said they wanted to be here when you came in. I said they did not have to do that. She said, I know. She said they wanted to. I went into the conference room. 9 people. The people who had been answering the phones and managing the properties and handling the tenants and doing the 1,000 daily tasks that kept 27 years of work running. I looked at them. I said, I am Lena Marsh. I said, most of you know me. I said, I am Thomas's daughter, and I am the owner of this company. I said, I am not going to make speeches about what my father built because you know what he built better than anyone. I said, I am going to do what he did. I said, I am going to be here. I said, I am going to answer the phone. I said, I am going to take the tenant calls at 2 a.m. when that is what is required. I said, I am going to run this the way he ran it. I said, because that is the way it should be run. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Sandra started clapping. 1 person, then 2, then all 9. I stood in the conference room of my father's company on the Monday after his funeral, and I let them clap because they were clapping for him and he deserved it. Every last second of it. My Uncle Philip and I are not close. I want to be honest about that. We are civil, we are family, in the specific managed way of people who share a grandmother and a history and a significant event that sits between them, and that has not been fully resolved by an apology, however genuine. He comes to holidays. I come to holidays. We speak. We do not speak about the business. I do not need him to understand what he did more fully than he already does. I need the business to run well. It runs well. That is sufficient. I kept one thing from my father's office, the business card holder on his desk, a small wooden thing he had bought in year 1 when the company had 1 employee and 1 contract, and he had ordered business cards because he said a business without cards was not yet a business. The cards in it when he died were outdated. The address was old. The phone number had changed twice. The email was from a domain he had switched away from years ago, but the cards were his. His name, Thomas Marsh, Marsh Property Management. I put a new card in the holder, same name on the business, different name underneath, Lena Marsh, owner. I look at it every morning when I sit at the desk that was his, in the corner office with the window that looks at the street he watched change for 27 years. I watch it now. Some mornings I think I understand what he saw in it, the specific satisfaction of watching something grow that you had a hand in, the knowledge that what you built is solid enough to outlast you. He built it solid. I am keeping it that way. That is my story. One Wednesday morning, one Wednesday evening, 27 years of a business and an operating agreement and a letter of instruction, and a man who knew his brother well enough to prepare for exactly what his brother would do. If someone in your life is circling something that belongs to you, document your ownership now, not when the threat arrives, before. Because the document your father signs on a Thursday afternoon 3 months before he dies is the only thing standing between what he built and the person who was never going to ask permission. Get it in writing. Get it filed. And trust that the documents will hold when the room needs them to. They always do. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment and tell me which part of this story stayed with you. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.